All right, we're now live on Facebook. I'm with Dr. Bob Holsworth, one of the preeminent political scientists in Virginia, sort of Dr. Bob. He's been the guiding light of information for so many people in the political space in Virginia. Let's jump right into it. Good morning. First of all, what's the latest and greatest on COVID in Virginia, Dr. Bob Holsworth?
I think things are, pretty steady from where they'd been when we spoke last. Hospitalization numbers are still between 1,100 and 1,200. That's well below the pandemic high of 1,625, but above the pandemic low of 756. We're seeing about 900 to 1,000 cases a day, which is a little bit of a rise from where we were a couple of weeks ago. The change, of course, has been that we've seen more cases in the Hampton Roads area and fewer cases in Nova, and also some cases sort of spreading out in Virginia. Places like Danville, Pennsylvania, Washington County, Abington, they're seeing cases. And I guess the interesting or challenging thing about those cases is that then poses issues for these school boards, Chris, about what are they going to do about reopening. And what I'm seeing, at least right now, is checking it out today, is that there's sort of a patchwork policy landscape that's emerging about school reopenings in Virginia. Just looked at sort of the 10 largest jurisdictions, and there's a lot of differences that are occurring. Some, like Fairfax, are going to have a hybrid situation with a virtual opt-out. City of Richmond is going to be all virtual for the fall. Chesterfield County is going to be virtual for some weeks in the fall, except for students who are English as a second language or special ed. We saw the Henrico superintendent say she's going to recommend virtual for the first 9 weeks. So this is a little odd, that I'm a big supporter of local control of schools, but it just doesn't seem that there's a lot of either state or federal guidance to these school boards about what they should be doing. And we're going to wind up with this extraordinary situation where school districts that are located adjacent to one another are going to have different policies about opening or not. And then if you actually include some of the private schools, we're going to see schools within the same locality have policies that could be 180 degrees different about whether they're opening or not. So I guess it all depends on what you think about local control, which, as I said, I'm in favor of for sure. But at the same time, I would have liked to see some clearer guidance to these school boards about under what conditions should they open, under what conditions should they do hybrid work, and under what conditions should they do fully virtual, because we're seeing, I'm calling it a patchwork. I think some other people would call it a mess.
Well, it would appear to be a mess given the, I think, detailed level of guidance that the Northam administration gave to businesses to open. The most recent one that I remember was a 38-page document on how they can open and do business in Virginia. But schools, are they getting the same level of guidance from the state? And
no, I don't even.
Why not? I mean, what's the problem here?
Yeah, I don't know, and that also should come from the federal government as well about what exactly what you should do. What should be the criteria or the standard criteria that would tell you we should do A or B, or none of that seems to actually have occurred to these at least these school boards don't seem to be dealing with it. And then beyond that, you have an emergence in a lot of the communities, Chris, of I don't know if I'd call it a debate or a dialogue or a controversy between what you're seeing in these parent surveys and what you're seeing in the surveys of employees, teachers, and staff. Right. The latter seem to be quite worried about reopening, and you're seeing in most of these instances a plurality of the parents, not necessarily unanimous by any means, or in some cases not even a majority, but a plurality for sure, and in other cases a majority wanting to have reopenings. So by and large, in the absence of very clear guidance, all of these school systems are put in the position of making decisions that are going to be very controversial one way or another. And I would certainly prefer, as you said, to have seen clearer guidance that would give, that would have at least a decision tree associated with it to which the school boards could refer. You may have seen this in Chesterfield that, prior to the decision last night, one of the persons who did vote for opening just said that, he felt he was in a horrible bind because he didn't know, exactly what information would be, the most useful. And even the school board chair last night said, why in the world are we having to make this decision in some way? So it was, I guess it was something that, people didn't expect when they were running. But by and large, I think the absence of very clear decision trees are leading to this situation where we're really going to have a patchwork education system, certainly for the first 9 or 12 weeks of the fall.
At least in Henrico County. So I agree with you on local control, and sometimes that works to the disadvantage of people who advocate for that sometimes because they don't like what they actually decide. But ultimately, the decision to enroll your student, your child in public schools should be left up to the parent. But this is a compulsory educational system for public schools. So, and there's no wonder they're seeing private schools enrollment increasing, or especially online programs and homeschooling opportunities. But I guess it comes down to, or should it come down to, whether or not the parent actually wants to send their kid to a school. They might have, in their own home or in their family structure, people who have vulnerable demographics or comorbidities.
Oh, absolutely. And almost all the school systems, to their credit, are providing a virtual opt-out for any parent. Yeah, even the schools that are going like Hanover County to 5-day-a-week on site have a virtual opt-out. So all the schools have that. The question, however, is that you're going to have Henrico County sitting next to Hanover County, where if the school superintendent in Henrico's decision is approved by the school board, for 9 weeks they'll be virtual, while the person across the block living in Hanover will be sending their child to school for 5 days in most instances. So that's kind of the situation that we're going to be in, and maybe that's a good thing. But at the end of the day, I think it looks to me a little bit odd. And of course, the real challenge is for the students who have the most difficulty learning virtually. Right. And these students, in most instances in Virginia, weren't in school for the last 3 months. And if you go another semester or another year without that, you have a real situation where they could fall behind even further. So this is, I think, something that all the school systems really have to pay attention to right now.
Absolutely, because if you're a parent and your student's been out for at least 3 months and over the summer, and as a former teacher, we all know the gap that occurs over summer, that you have to sort of reboot their brains and their systems going into the fall. And you probably understand that going into even at the collegiate level. But if they're off another 6 months, do they have to go back and restart the whole year that they lost? And how much does that back up the process of getting kids in the flow?
Yeah, well, the state's going to have to make a decision there about, again, what it does with testing next year. This year it kind of, took a pass on some of the testing. And then what does it do next year on the testing? And, what do we see between the people who were in school on site, those who were not? And one of the things that we've really learned over time is that, and a lot of parents know that they may have 2 or 3 children who have very different learning styles themselves. Mm-hmm. Some who will be very, very comfortable in the online virtual environment, some who will not be. And that's going to be a real challenge. And maybe it's just sort of the natural outcome of the virus. But I don't think anyone ever imagined that we would wind up with 133 jurisdictions making 15 different decisions about how to open.
Yeah, I think this the question of testing and having kids in class and the priority of that, it's going to be a wake-up call to policymakers as to what is really important, getting kids through the system and getting them graduated, or getting the information in their heads. And this is after coming out of the SOL era of the 90s and into the early aughts, I think this is going to be a real test of priorities for education policymakers in Virginia.
Sure, absolutely. And, even, sort of beyond that, what then are the benchmarks by which we're going to say we're successful or not?
Exactly.
Is coming up. So, we're dealing with that, and it's not not an easy question. It's not an easy issue for any of these school boards because, one of the other issues that could emerge is that there may be different safety profiles between elementary and middle school and high school kids. Mm-hmm. That some may find it easier to catch the virus or to infect others. And there's a lot that we still are not don't completely know right now, and that leads to a degree of uncertainty and anxiety.
Well, this whole COVID situation has, I guess, prioritized our priorities, and we're going to find out real quick what really matters when it comes to governing in the United States and in Virginia. Let's switch over, if we can, to the 7th Congressional District. Just call it a heat stroke convention that was held out in Doswell. I call it the Doswell disaster that nominated Nick Freitas over 5 or 6 total Republicans running for that. What were your thoughts coming out of that convention?
Well, I think, as you said, I think someone there said it was hotly contested, and only I think only the Virginia Republican Party could think up something like this, Chris.
Only the Republican Party of Virginia is this fundamentally stupid. I mean, they
can hold an event in 100-degree weather in which people have to, stay there for multiple hours. Someone asked me, one of these reporters asked me, the previous week about who was going to win. I said, it just depends who not only who shows up, but who stays there for this period of time. So, my presumption is that he probably had more support throughout the district than everyone else. And so Freitas is probably the candidate they wanted. I think the one challenge that comes out of this is that they don't have a candidate who comes out of the suburban part of the district. Mm-hmm. Of Henrico and Chesterfield, and that may make it a little bit easier for Spanberger. This is the district that Donald Trump carried by 5 points in 2016, and actually the Republicans carried it by more. Hillary Clinton got 45% of the vote, Trump got 50, and the third-party candidates, who are really Republicans in disguise, got about 5% as well. So it's a Republican-leaning district. Spanberger won in 2018. She's a remarkable candidate. She ran a great campaign, turned it into a social movement, and Dave Bratt ran what I consider to be one of the worst campaigns I've ever seen in running for Congress. You might recall that he kind of, avoided any talking to the media, seemed to avoid any crowds, and that it was epitomized actually by the last evening of the campaign, where Spanberger went back to her own high school, you might recall, had 2,000 people, all of the Democratic leadership there endorsing her candidate. And when the press asked Dave what he was doing, he said he was having a private rally in Spotsylvania. And so my thinking is that this campaign will be a little different. Spanberger enters with a very large financial advantage. And so Freitas is going to have national Republican money come in, think that this is an opportunity to take a seat in order to, I think, win it back. I think it's a district that Trump could well carry once again, and that would be very good for the Republicans. But at the same time, they're up against, I think, a very formidable campaigner in Abigail Spanberger, extremely hard worker, and it won't be an easy seat to take back.
It won't be an easy seat to take back, but as you know, 5 points is a big margin to make up, even if you're an incumbent, even with a lot of money, because structurally, in today's negative partisan environment, they go right. It's a straight ticket shot, and to get the number of independents to break her away, she's going to have to identify them. Obviously, what she's going to do with that kind of money and those resources, you'll find the way to identify those voters, but also appeal to them that the right thing to do for those independents is to send her back. While Nick can say, closing it out, if Biden appears to win, I'll keep a check on Joe Biden, which is a very compelling argument to independent voters.
Yeah, I think it's as you mentioned, it's a very tough district, because I think it's even more than 5 points in some ways, because of Trump got 50%, but other Republicans got 5% of that vote, and as a third party vote. Hillary Clinton only got 45%, but Spanberger did in 2018 win, and you look at the way she has run since then. She does a lot of things right. She has spent a lot of time in the rural parts of the district talking about access to health care or rural broadband. But at the end of the day, the question is whether that can overcome, as you mentioned, a partisan identification that's fairly deep in the district, and in which, you're either for or against Donald Trump at the end of the day. Right. On that front, and that'll be the challenge. I saw one of Spanberger's first TV ads today. They really don't, they basically talk about her trying to be a problem solver, going across the aisle, and that tells you that once again the Democrats believe, and the Spanberger people believe, that in that district, running as a Democrat per se is not the way to win.
And she certainly hasn't branded herself as a hard Democrat per se. I mean, she didn't vote for Nancy Pelosi out of the gate, if memory serves. But she's taken some votes, and the votes are what the Freitas campaign is going to say. Yes, she says this, but so there's always that narrative, counter narrative that Spanberger is going to have to really address when she's the incumbent. There's going to be a referendum on her with those. But this is a small percentage of voters overall that they're going to be targeting. Because right. Both parties are going to be out there doing what they do.
Right, exactly. And so the question for her is, can she win all these moderates in the counties, these 2 counties that she did so well with against Dave Bratt? And she'll have a lot of volunteers again. She really energizes Democrats to work extraordinarily hard. The question is, and my sense is that, the other advantage she could have is that Trump's standing in the 2 counties may actually be worse today than it was in 2016. So I expect a very close race, a competitive race. But certainly if the Republicans can't take this seat this time, it's going to bode very poorly for the party down the road, I think.
No way to predict redistricting going for 2022, what this district is going to look like, but obviously it's going to be probably more Richmond suburban centric, wouldn't you imagine?
Well, we don't know, because we don't know what this redistricting is going to actually look like. And this was one of the things that I thought was very curious about the Democrats actually going along with the redistricting amendment, the bipartisan redistricting amendment, because I thought, basically it puts a couple, the Democrats could draw, if they held the power here, they could keep the Spanberger seat regardless of what happened here. They could keep the Luria seat, and they could probably knock off the 5th district seat as well if they wanted to. But certainly two out of those 3 they could hold very easily if they controlled redistricting. In a nonpartisan redistricting climate, I think it's a little more uncertain what would happen there.
I think even with just the way you look at the map of these things, if you look at the map of the 7th, if Freitas wins, he's probably going to be drawn out of the district because he's so much north of the population base, and he'll be drawn into one of the Prince William seats, the Commonwealth.
Right. That's what I think is likely to happen. It would have happened for sure if the Democrats controlled redistricting in a partisan way. It may happen under a nonpartisan side as well. And it makes real sense to say, the essence of this district geographically is Richmond, is Chesterfield, Henrico. Right. And let's make a congressional district that, follows those 2 communities. I thought when I had chaired the bipartisan redistricting advisory commission that McDonald put together back when he was governor, that the best maps actually had a district that was sort of Richmond, Chesterfield, Henrico, or you could say Henrico, Chesterfield, Hanover. But it would seem to me that that makes a lot more sense in terms of community of interest than going up to Culpeper.
I have to completely agree with you on that one. But that's the nature of politics, is to get into a redistricting. Op-ed this morning by Wyatt Durrett, hoping that people will continue to support the redistricting amendment. How do you see that redistricting amendment pan out this November?
Those usually win pretty easily with when the public votes. If you ask the public, should you have a nonpartisan redistricting, or should you leave it to the politicians? They usually say, let's take it away from the politicians. That's been sort of the national mood on that. So there are a lot of Democrats who really, particularly in the House of delegates, who object to this. They think, why in the world did we do this? I think in terms of sheer power, they have an argument, but by and large, it's going to be tough to convince the public that redistricting should be left to the politicians after you've complained about it royally for 20 years.
This is one of the things I found striking, and actually not surprising, but still striking, was the number of Democrats who came out and opposed it in the last session, trying to stop it, having campaigned on it for years and years. Do you think that hurts them in the next election cycle, especially for the House?
Not necessarily, because that by and large people have rarely voted. They support. This is one of those issues where you have a large public support, but it really doesn't motivate an election about an individual. So in terms of a referendum issue, that I presume the public is going to support it, but in terms of translating this into, is this the key issue in my constituency? When the roads don't move, or there's some other, I'm worried about the schools or some other matter. Those tend to really motivate voters far more than good government issues like redistricting or campaign finance reform do.
Yeah, I just think the once you attack with the label of hypocrisy, it's tough to get that off your shoe. It's just one of those brutal brands you don't want, and it's tough medicine for an incumbent who is trying to do the thing that his party now says they want to do and stop this thing, when the polling shows, I think, well as it should, passing substantially. Let's move over to Joe Biden's upcoming pick for vice president. If it's really Joe Biden's at all, let's not kid ourselves. It's a team effort. The Democrats are running. Who do you think it's going to be, Dr. Bob Holsworth?
Well, I think the safest pick for Joe Biden is Kamala Harris. She's well known, I think, relatively well known. She doesn't bring a particular state, but my sense is that there won't be any questions about her capacity to be the president. I don't think she absolutely mobilizes the Democratic base, but on the same time, she doesn't antagonize the Democratic base very much at all either. So my sense is at the end of the day, she is the, probably the safest pick. Biden says he wants to have somebody that he can feels very simpatico with. Certainly during the debates, they weren't too simpatico, as she attacked him pretty ruthlessly on issues with respect to race in some degree. But at the same time, politicians have had far bigger differences in which they wound up on the same ticket together. So my sense at the end of the day, she's the best choice or the safest choice for him. Certainly there are a lot of other people that he's considering right now. But at the end of the day, I can't imagine that he's going to pick Elizabeth Warren, because I don't think there's any generational contrast there. So I think that doesn't work for him very well. I think he needs to pick somebody because of his age and because of the kind of attack that Donald Trump is making, that people are going to automatically say this person can be president, and you don't have to make that case very substantially for. And some of the other folks that are being considered, you might have to make that case. It's going to be a little tougher. Val Demings from Florida, or, I think Keisha Lance Bottoms from Atlanta, the mayor, who's very good on television, but, is relatively newcomer to national politics. There's some talk about Karen Bass in California. I think that you can make the case for her being the president, but she's not as well known as Kamala Harris. So the more I think about this, the more I think that Harris makes the most sense. But that's not always what we see in a vice presidential choice.
Right. I like Karen Bass as the pick. Here's why: she didn't attack him on race, and race is the big issue right now. And I think if Kamala Harris is picked, they just play the tape on her attacking him in the debates ruthlessly in the markets that the Republicans want to suppress turnout. Karen Bass is a competent legislator, was Speaker of the Assembly in California, well-known, well-liked in D.C. Haven't heard too much baggage, if you will. But I think that's a better pick because she won't outshine the top of the ticket when they need to have someone who won't take away the spotlight from Biden and have the enthusiasm gap grow. Doesn't have the negatives that Harris has, especially in the Black community. I mean, when I talk to African Americans, they say, she's a cop, and that's a tough one right now. So it's a double whammy. She turns off some voters because, and again, you don't have to turn them all off, just enough to win, right? In key states. So I think Kamala Harris comes with a little bit more uncertainty politically for Joe Biden and can possibly outshine him, which no front runner wants. But so I'm going to go with Karen Bass. What the heck? Nothing to win.
Yeah, well, I think those would probably be the number one and number two choices that I would think would be there. As I said, I think the issue with Elizabeth Warren as well is that she is a hero to many of the progressives, but at the same time, would be somebody that some of the moderates who are supporting Biden would have to swallow hard with in that front. And, what she seems to have done very effectively actually has been able to influence the Biden platform. So I think there's a lot that the progressives are starting to like about what they're seeing in terms of the issues that Biden is talking about. And so he might be able to speak about those issues without necessarily having to identify someone who is so clearly connected to the most progressive wing of the party for his VP choice. So I think Harris and Bass are, at least right now, make the most sense to me, and we'll have to see where he goes.
Yeah, Elizabeth Warren, I know, would mobilize much of the business community who don't like Trump, like some of his issues, but in this negative partisanship could be driven to say, look, here are your choices. Elizabeth Warren or Republican Party, and basically going in which direction ideologically do you really want to go, swallow hard on your pick for Donald Trump. Because again, just about every business person I speak with, they're like, I don't like the guy, but business was pretty good before the COVID. Didn't like the way he handled the pandemic, but these guys long-term would be much worse for my business. And I think, for the folks that I represent and work with every day, that's a big one for them. And I think Warren would turn off a lot of voters that would otherwise want to stop Donald Trump and the craziness that sometimes goes on with this administration.
Yeah, I'm not sure he wants to bring up any what I would call extraneous issue to what he's already brought up. That by and large, that Biden's running the campaign as a referendum on Trump.
Right.
He's he's content with that. He wants to run as a referendum on Trump's personality, Trump's handling of COVID, and the high drama that Trump brings to politics every day. Biden wants to say, let's be responsible, let's get rid of this stuff, and at the same time, let's make some significant changes in American life that you're going to see in my policies. But I think Biden's strength as an empathetic person that is perceived to be responsible and connected to the middle class is not something that he's going to want to jeopardize with a vice presidential choice that brings a totally new dimension into the campaign.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. All right. Dr. Bob Holsworth, thanks for joining us here on Virginia Free TV. Look forward to seeing you next Tuesday at 10 a.m. We're doing a weekly show with you, and really enjoy it, and thank you for your time.
Hey, take care, Chris. Have a good week.
You too. Thanks, Bob.